and welcome to Thrift Shop Biography. This is the one about Johnny Cash. Thank you for listening. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
All right, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks.
Good, just had a coffee, that's why.
Yeah, I know.
I'm
And a
raging
donut.
now.
Yeah.
No, it's good.
So, Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
The Man in Black.
Dude.
Yeah, we've been reading him this week.
Yeah.
Oh, I loved this book.
Yeah.
It's like the great American novel again, isn't it? Sometimes people just nail their autobiographies, and I know they have ghostwriters and stuff, but this is such a readable book. And so involving. I loved it.
It's like he's a writer. Oh, yeah, of course he's a writer, because these people who write music are writers and poets, but they can't always make that crossover into a book, and he does.
Yeah, he has.
Yeah.
So, are you a Johnny Cash fan?
Yeah, I like him a lot. I'm more of an Elvis guy. I'm more of the upbeat rock and roll, because I tend to avoid the darker side of music because it just gets me down. I can't pull myself out. But a lot of people absolutely love it, and that's why they love it, because they connect with the darkness. I avoid it, listen to disco. How about you?
Well, funny, I'm kind of drawn to sadness.
You are?
Yeah, and so I do love Johnny Cash. But there's one song that he did right at the end of his life. He covered Hurt by 9 Inch Nails.
Oh, he did, yeah.
I can't listen to it.
No.
It's so unspeakably sad and moving. And his voice is obviously, he's at the end of his life. It really is something of itself. Like, talk about listening to the song, but I certainly can't watch the music video because, like, June died about 6 weeks after they shot it.
Hell. He's a sort of man who carries all of his pain in his soul, and then it comes out through his music.
Yeah.
It's there. He feels it all, doesn't he?
Yeah, he really does. And of course, he had that awful tragedy when he was a kid that we'll talk about.
Yeah,
But,
he's had lots, actually. This whole book's peppered with mates dying in car crashes, and weirdly, tons of people who know their death's coming in advance. Isn't it? There's loads of that.
Yeah, there is a lot of that. But also, this is an incredibly spiritual Christian man.
But they're quite weirdly accurate, a lot of these people. They're like, oh, my time's coming sometime this week, and then a car comes across and kills them, and it wasn't them that did it, you know.
Like Final Destination.
What? Yeah.
But no, but I wonder if, because he is so entirely spiritual, that after the fact he's connecting the dots. He's thinking back in time before they died and said, oh, we had that conversation. It seemed like maybe they were premonition.
You can't accept it. You can't accept it.
No, you can't know when you're going to die.
Well,
you?
How many of these people did those? Weird.
Because he's putting his own Christian impression retrospectively onto it.
But what about these people who go, I think I'm going to die sometime this week, and then they do?
Well, that's like manifesting.
Yeah,
so you've got to be careful.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. We need to start the actual.
Yeah, we better start.
Yeah. So Johnny Cash.
He goes right back in his family history, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does.
He goes right back to the beginning of time, pretty much. We'll skip that.
Yeah, we will.
Yeah. And
we just need to know that his granddad was a farmer and a travelling preacher and ended up in Arkansas. Have I remembered that right?
Yeah. For years I said Arkansas.
Did you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because Americans always pronounce things as they're spelled. It's us who are weird.
No, but there is Kansas, which is spelled Kansas.
How
and
would
now
we
we've
know
got
that?
Arkansas, but actually that's Arkansas.
Yeah, and they never pronounce things weirdly. It's like, that's the only one.
What? They never pronounce
we
things
do.
weirdly.
We pronounce everything totally different from how it's written. That's their one weird one, isn't it? Arkansas.
And his dad, Johnny Cash's dad, was one of 12 children. But he was the youngest. And then by the time he was 18, he'd lost his mum and dad. So he was on his own, and he was called Ray, and he married a young lady called Carrie in 1920.
Carrie Rivers, which is only significant because she had this really cool dad who was quite a legend. Now I've forgotten his name, but it was something Rivers.
Old Man Rivers?
The Old Man Rivers, that's excellent. And he was a preacher, and he sang, and people used to come from far and wide to hear him sing. So that was Johnny Cash's other granddad. So he had music in his family from his mum's side.
Do you know what I think is funny about Carrie Rivers?
What?
Well, when she married, she became Carrie Cash.
Oh my God! Cash and Carrie.
It's like a wholesale supermarket. And they had 7 children, of which little Johnny was the 4th. And Dad is called Ray, and he wanted to call Johnny Ray. Oh, Johnny Ray, there's another singer.
Oh my God.
No, because Johnny wasn't Johnny, he was John.
Yeah.
Sorry. Mum wanted to call him John, Dad wanted to call him Ray. So that's JR. So he became known as JR. But it was when he joined the Air Force, he couldn't have an initial as his first name, so he became John R. Cash.
And he says most of his close friends and family call him JR or John. It's Johnny's kind of a stage name. It always seems to keep people a bit more sane when they separate. Mind you, it didn't help him much.
Oh, my goodness. No,
Mostly lost it on and off.
So his dad was a complete grafter. I mean, we're talking about, they had 7 kids during the Great Depression, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, but Dad worked hard. If he wasn't in the sawmill, he was laying the railroad tracks.
Well, actually, it's brilliant because Johnny Cash was born in a tiny shotgun house. When he was 2, it was the Depression era. It would be 1934, and it was Roosevelt, I think it was the New Deal. Was that Roosevelt?
Yes.
Was that another president?
Don't know.
I learned it at school, this stuff.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. The New Deal was a big thing. Actually, it's totally based on communism, but you have to say that quietly because around that time in America, you weren't allowed to be a communist. But it really was based on it. It was communal living.
Yeah.
And they got massive bits of land, carved them all up, and gave each family a bit of land. It was a real amazing thing to happen to this family because they had no space or any hope. And then they got a house. They got 20 acres, a house, a barn, a stake in a general store.
And a smokehouse.
Cotton gin, smokehouse, and then all the crops would go into a big pile collectively and then sell for a better price. Yeah, it just makes sense. Yeah, that's communism.
But when they got there, it was like Johnny Cash describes it as a jungle. And his dad and his oldest brother were out from dusk till dawn, chopping it down with machetes. And I kind of thought, wow, that must have taken a while because they got 20 acres. And then he said the first year they managed to get 2 acres up and running and planted cotton. And it's like, wow, clearing that area for that father and his son literally took years. And they were planting stuff as they were still clearing the area. It's astonishing how hard they were.
Yeah, I guess his dad's a farmer and a really good one as well, so he learned. It's that classic land of opportunity of America. You give people the opportunity, and if they work hard enough, they can make something of themselves, and that's what happened.
And they also, so they were growing a crop, cotton, but they were also, the food they were eating and the food for their animals was also being, they're kind of like self-sufficient, but like you say, with all the neighbouring plots as well. It was very community-driven.
Yeah, it's good. And then by the time he turns 5... he's ready to work.
Yeah. He starts off as a water boy, he says, where you just take water around to all the
day,
workers. Yeah.
Every day.
But by the time he's 8, he's picking cotton and filling the sacks up. And
and he does describe how hard the work is. Who else worked like this? Willie Nelson.
Willie Nelson, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a similar trajectory.
It really is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's hard. It's a hard life. You get Sunday off for church.
Yeah. Because Jesus makes the cotton grow slower on a Sunday. So people
just
can go
stops.
to church. Yeah, so he jumps to when he's about 12 years old, right?
Yeah, because you don't want to hear 7 years worth of cotton picking.
And also, he does actually say in that time how the crops thrive. But then, of course, you get the cycle where actually you don't get as much.
Well, yeah, you
and then
eventually
you're back
tire.
into poverty.
Yeah, the land gets tired. You've used up all the nutrients, I'm guessing, not being an expert on farming.
You need to do a bit of crop rotation.
Yeah, they do, though.
Yeah.
But it still tires out the land. So there are diminishing returns.
Mm-hmm. So the sons, Johnny's older brothers, do go out and work elsewhere to get cash. Back for the Cash family.
Yes, cash for cash. Yeah, so he's got a job. The brother who's older than him, he's only 2 years older.
Jack,
he's 14 when Johnny Cash is 12. Mm-hmm. And he goes out to a job where he's cutting fence posts for $3 a day, which sounds all right in 1940.
Yeah.
For a 14-year-old lad, that sounds all right. But he really didn't want to go that day, which is the first of his weird premonitionary death stories of many in this book, which Richard's sceptical of. He's just had a bad feeling, didn't want to go.
His mum did as well, and Johnny did, because Johnny's going fishing.
Yeah.
And he says, Jack, come fishing with me. And Jack's like, I need to go and earn the money. And the mum is like, don't go. I've got a bad feeling about this. And he's like, no, we need the money because the crops aren't happening. So
please come fishing. No. And then he was weird and he was hovering and he started doing impressions of what's up, Doc? And he said, that's just so out of character. It was just weird. And he wandered off towards his place. And anyway, the sawmill, the actual blade of the table saw, dislodged and sliced him right through. They took him to hospital and they had to take out quite a lot of his innards, the doctor said, and didn't know if he'd survive or not, but he survived enough to come to and be all chirpy, chat to them all.
He was probably on morphine, wasn't he?
Yeah, I know, but it's amazing he even survived at all to talk again. Absolutely horrifying, the whole thing, having this little kid come to and talk and be all chirpy, and then he was seeing angels and saying it's beautiful where I'm going, and then eventually died, I don't know, 3 days later or something. Utterly traumatic for the lot of them. But for Johnny, that was his best friend, and he became incredibly lonely after that.
It's unspeakably sad. And like he said, there's no time for grieving there because they went to his funeral and then the next day his mum's back out picking cotton.
Collapsing, crying and picking cotton.
Yeah. Oh, it's rough, isn't it?
It's pretty rough.
Do you know what? Also, his dad, when Johnny was fishing, I think Johnny was coming home from fishing and the dad passed him in the preacher's car. So immediately Johnny's like, oh, shit, something's happened. And they go back to the house and Johnny's dad gets out Jack's bloody clothing where it's been torn by the saw and he shows it to little Johnny and says, your brother's been hurt. I think that's such a strange thing to do to your little kid.
He must have just been going out of his mind, though. It's funny, he talks a bit later about his dad and he's trying to work out whether he was good or not, religious or not. He said, my dad stopped drinking when Jack died, which obviously implies he was drinking a lot before that. And then he says, I think he was a good person. He was sometimes harsh and he shot my dog.
Oh, yeah.
He shot his dog when Johnny was 5, and that had been his dog, and he'd had it for a year. And he's like, you try telling a little boy what that means. That was my other best friend, and my life seemed to stop after that. I couldn't trust anything again after that. He just left it in his ditch as well.
Yeah, I think maybe it was because they had so little food. I think the dog was just a stray or something that Johnny had picked up, and it was quite literally another mouth to feed that they
I get that,
couldn't.
but bury it then. Don't leave it in a ditch for your son to find with a bullet in it. But so it's a bit funny. He doesn't really go into it too much, but you have to just guess. His dad then became really religious and preached, and he said it was really cool for him to see his dad preaching. There's so much religion in this, isn't there? He's mad for it.
Do you know what? I was surprised as the book went on how more religious Johnny Cash becomes and even ends up like studying the Bible.
Oh my God, stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, he's proper right into it all.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Because I think most people who grow up in that environment it tends to get watered down as they go and make their life in the wider world.
I think Willie Nelson, let's say, probably it dropped off a lot, and for him it became, he's a real God botherer. Is that a phrase? Did I make that up?
It's a kind of, it's a derogatory phrase, but it is certainly a phrase.
Anyway, yes. Anyway, he hasn't even strummed a guitar yet.
No.
So let's get to that.
Well, his mum actually was musical. She played the guitar.
Yes.
She had a fiddle.
Oh, no.
And she sang.
Yes.
Right. And then she actually paid for Johnny to have singing lessons when he's a little boy.
Yeah, only the one.
It was 2, actually.
Oh. Sorry.
So he must have a nice little voice as a young boy. The fact that his mum's investing, he says she had to take on extra work to pay for the singing lessons, and he was like against it. So she obviously felt very strongly that her little boy wanted singing lessons, which shows how important music is to her. Mm-hmm. And that does show that probably comes from her family, right?
But the singing teacher just went, no, your voice is so unique. There's nothing I can teach you. You just keep singing how you sing.
I love that.
I love that. But then he says afterwards, I would have actually quite liked some of the technique.
Yeah,
to learn the technique. Never mind. Yeah.
Well, just don't take as many drugs.
Well, that's definitely the key thing, yeah.
But then he says when his voice broke, his mum had tears in her eyes and she said, "Oh my God, you sound just like my daddy."
Yeah.
So her dad was also a good singer, right?
And because he was the one who was singing in church. People came from far and wide to see him.
Mm-hmm.
She said at that point, she said to him, "God is in you. You are special. You are going to make it."
You've got the gift.
Yeah, she was really encouraging him, where Dad was like, "That's a waste of time, son.
Mm-hmm.
You need to get a proper job."
Yeah. Because his voice is God-given.
Yes.
He recognises that he is only the bearer of his voice.
Yes.
He's not the owner.
Yes.
Because God has blessed him with a voice.
A lot of people say that.
Isn't it just nature that he has a good voice? Why does God have to give it to him?
Well, you see, if we want to get into this, God maybe isn't another word for nature.
Maybe isn't
maybe God
another
is
word.
nature.
Oh,
Maybe
okay.
nature is God. Maybe, what does that word mean anyway?
I think this is the wrong podcast.
We can't get into a religious debate. Right, anyway.
Do you know what? I did
Time.
think about it, just how much joy and credence Johnny Cash puts onto the Bible.
Yeah.
Did actually make me think if I missed out by not reading it. So I was going to propose to you, shall we do a spin-off podcast where we read the Bible and talk about it?
You can do that with somebody else. You don't have time. Yeah, no, you said to me the other day, "Oh, should we read the Bible?" And I said, "It's not an autobiography, it's a biography."
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, all the other apostles wrote it.
But that would be like the book that Jermaine Jackson wrote about Michael, right?
Oh, do we have to do the Bible?
Who was it?
No,
Who was it? The biography of God or Jesus?
I tell you what it is like. It's like all of Motley Crue writing a whole
That's
book.
exactly what it's
Yeah,
like.
because it's all of the apostles. It's exactly like that.
But do you think anybody gets a phone put up their vagina?
Good grief. Good grief. Anyway.
So, as we said, like the land has become exhausted and Johnny is now like a teenager, like 16. And the thing that young men used to do at that moment in time when the farms weren't making money, would they go and join the forces, the army. And Johnny joined the Air Force and he was posted in Germany.
Beyond that, he also got to travel with the Air Force.
Yes.
He was in it for 4 years. See, these are the highlights, right? He said he was in London in 1953 and saw the Queen's coronation.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
I know, Johnny Cash was in that crowd.
Yeah, you would never guess that.
No.
And he fished in Bavaria. He went to the Folies Bergère in Paris. He saw flamenco guitarists in Barcelona. And he basically had girls everywhere.
Yeah, of course.
That was a major hobby. And drinking and fighting.
And the thing that I find quite interesting about his time in Germany is that he actually bought a reel-to-reel tape recorder, which was cutting edge and expensive. So that shows how into music he is.
Oh, he was obsessed.
And that he's, however much he's getting paid by the Air Force, he's saving some of that money to buy something to record his music on.
Yeah, exactly.
Whilst he's in the Air Force, in barracks, and him and his friends, he said they would just, whatever were the popular songs of the day, they would just do terrible cover versions and stuff. But he's productively into music and creating.
Oh, yeah, we've got to mention that they had a radio in their house. So he got to hear everything. And then his dad would say, turn it off. So he'd put it really quietly and put his ear to it. Absolutely, his whole world was in that radio. And also, of course, the cotton fields, they're singing all the time. Everyone's singing all the time. It's just American folk music. Yeah, his whole mind and life and heart and soul is music.
Yeah, and it does sound like, unlike his brothers, Johnny is a little singer.
Yeah.
Like, and he sings with his mum and his sister.
Yeah.
He doesn't say he sings with his brothers. He says he sings with his mum and his sister.
That's true.
But also, when he was in the Air Force, he was a radio interceptor.
Yeah, he was exceptionally good with the Morse code.
He was the first person to intercept the message that Stalin had died.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
So he's like, outside of Russia,
Yeah.
he would have been the first American in history to have known that Stalin died.
And he decoded it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And passed it on.
Yeah.
But also, because he said the equipment they had in Germany was so powerful, he said he could listen in to any radio broadcast anywhere in the world and he could pick up the Grand Ole Opry.
Yeah.
So whilst he's in the Air Force, he's listening.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really good.
Before he went to Germany, he had met a young lady in an ice skating rink.
Yeah.
Vivian.
And
they met literally 3 weeks before he was posted. Now, they wrote to each other almost every day, and there are hundreds of letters. He did 4 years in the Air Force, and they really wanted to hold on to him because he was so good, and they wanted to give him a sergeant's post in the Secret Service.
Yeah, but they only tried to promote him about a week before he was leaving, and he was like too little too late.
So they discharged him, and he went back to America, where he met up with Vivian, and they got married.
Yeah.
In 1954.
He'd had 1 million women in that time.
Yeah.
Mind you never know what she was getting up to. And he said they had a really good time at first. Oh, they moved to Memphis because Memphis was where it was all happening. Mm-hmm. Don't know why it wasn't Nashville, because he was listening to the Grand Ole Opry. But anyway, Memphis was where it was at. So they moved there. He very quickly met his band, who he stayed with for a long time, if not forever. And they were, the core of his band were Luther and Marshall, who his brother Ray had put him in touch with.
They all worked together in the car shop.
Brother Ray, who's another person who stayed with him his whole life.
Brother Roy, his dad's
Roy, oh yeah. Yeah, Luther was on the guitar and Marshall on the bass. They were at the automobile sales company as ace mechanics.
I think Roy had actually been in a band.
Yeah, he had.
And had a modicum of success. I think they were played on the radio and stuff. Oh, but this is what happened. Roy was in a band that was potentially going somewhere, and then all of his bandmates got killed in the war.
That's right.
And so then Roy just didn't have the heart to continue with it.
Yeah.
And then when Johnny came back, he hooked Johnny up with Luther and Marshall.
Yeah, and just put everything into Johnny and supported him for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And Johnny, meanwhile, was working at the home equipment company. And he had this boss called George Bates. And he says, like, there's certain people have been angels to me in my life, and he was one.
He was so nice.
Great fellow. Yeah, probably the dad he'd never had.
We did have a dad.
But he was the one he never had. Because he didn't have that dad.
That dad that didn't shoot his dog.
Yeah. And he took him on as a salesman, even though he was absolutely crap. Because he used to go to people's houses and go, do you want to buy this? They go, we can't really afford it. And he was like, yeah, I can really see you can't. Don't buy it. But he sponsored him, the boss, in weekly 15-minute radio shows where he used to play all the records. I guess he played his own music as well and sang, and loaned him loads of money. After a year working there, he was $1,200 in debt in 1954.
Yeah, right.
Because he just believed in him so much. He just knew he'd make something of himself. And he did. He said as soon as he became an artist and went on the first tour as a Sun Records act, he went straight back to George and paid him all the money he owed him. It's really nice.
There was another up-and-coming singer in Memphis, Tennessee in 1954.
Isn't it cool reading about?
Have you heard of him?
Elvis.
Yeah, very interesting that Johnny heard that there was a gig down at the drugstore car park or something, and a flatbed truck just pulled up, and Elvis is singing on the back of the truck.
I know, it's just magical to read that.
Yeah.
It just is. And he's like, I remember these days almost more than I remember yesterday. You know, it's like, he's really sort of takes you there.
And he said there was about 200 screaming girls around the truck, but Johnny had Vivian, and they managed to get back and meet Elvis afterwards, and they just really seemed to instantly
they're musicians, aren't they? Both just similar aged musicians who want to talk about music.
And then Elvis says, I'm doing another gig, you should come along in a club. And it turns out what they didn't know when they booked the gig was that it was an adults only bar, which meant all the screaming girls couldn't get in. So there was like 15 people in this Elvis
most
gig.
He did. You know, I've always wondered if you have a genie's lamp, but it's a music one, and you could rub it and you could go to 3 different gigs, like which would you go to? And I'm like, well, one of them would be Elvis, but I don't know which, because I don't want to be in a screaming. I would need to hear the music. And after reading this, I'm like, that's one of my wishes.
Go to that.
I'd like to be standing next to Johnny Cash and his wife, listening to this gig. Because he said it was absolutely amazing, and he has so much charisma, but he's also a fabulous rhythm guitar player. You don't often get to hear it. Well, you wouldn't get to hear any of it, really. And then eventually ditches the guitar and just dances because everyone's watching him. But then this Scotty and Bill, these are legends, if you're an Elvis fan. They're his legendary, really simple, it's like, what do you call it? Like there's a washboard and a...
Oh, skiffle.
Skiffle. They've kind of got that skiffle sound. It's really simple, basic. Well, it's his original band. to hear that, and he was singing, he only had one single, That's All Right Mama, with the Blue Moon of Kentucky on the B-side. Yeah, because he said when he does the flatbed gig, he's just singing them on a loop, the 2 songs. But this gig, he sang a lot of other stuff. He sung some Black Blues and Long Tall Sally and all that other stuff. It's like, yeah, that's the one you want to be at.
So he's already quite quickly built a very strong connection with Elvis Presley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they tour together a lot after that. There's a small circle of them, aren't there, coming out of Memphis together?
There is, but Johnny Cash doesn't even have a record deal or anything at this point.
No,
he's just
doesn't.
a person in the crowd that Elvis is connected with because he's a musician. But it's not like Johnny Cash is anyone yet.
That's true. And he said, I didn't want to pester Elvis about Sun Records, so I wanted to do it all on my own. So eventually he meets Sun Records boss, Sam Phillips. Yeah.
Well, it's amazing what he did. He just went down and sat on the steps and waited for Sam Phillips to come and open up the
that's what Elvis
office.
did, but he did it for about 2 years.
Really?
Johnny kind of got in pretty quick.
Yeah.
I think it was the second time he went, Sir, if you listen to me, you'll be glad you did.
Yeah, and he took him inside and Johnny Cash played a song for him, Hey Porter. And then Sam Phillips says, okay, that's your first single. And Johnny Cash is like, well, I thought I was auditioning. But they actually recorded the first single. And Sam Phillips said to him, well, we need a song for the other side. And have you got any love songs? Because love songs sell.
Or a real weeper, he says.
And Johnny Cash didn't. And so he went home and wrote Cry, Cry, Cry. But he also said that Luther and Marshall weren't used to playing on the demand and stuff. And one of them in particular was nervous in the recording session. So it took like 35 takes. But he also said that sound, like the chugga boom, chugga, 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 chugga sound that Johnny Cash records have. People say, oh, it's a really distinctive style that you had in your early days. How did that come about? And it's like, that's literally all we could play. It wasn't by design. It was just because that's all they knew how to do. Just this very, really very simple rhythm.
And he says, some people say, did they hold me back? And he said, yeah, probably. He said, because people pulled songs then, didn't they? You know, they all shared them. So he said, there's a lot of songs I had to turn down because I couldn't work out the chords and neither could any of us. So I had to pass them up. But then what you get is just this raw...
Oh, the authentic...
Yeah. And he said, I didn't mind the mistakes in it because it made it seem more real.
Yeah. When you think about how music is now, where it's so refined to within a millimetre of its life, and you just use auto-tune, not just on voices, but on instruments and everything. There's something just so clinical and soulless about it now. Then you listen to these old recordings and it just... You hear it happen. It's like you're in the room with it.
That's why the best bit of that 68 comeback special of Elvis's is the bit where it's just him and Scotty and Bill. They're just jamming. It's just magic. I imagine that'd be very similar to this. But, well, you can go and listen to all the records, can't you?
Yeah.
There it is.
There was a bit of friction between Johnny Cash and Sam Phillips in the fact that Johnny Cash is very much gospel. And he really wants to make gospel music. But due to the massive success of Elvis, Sam Phillips wants to turn Johnny Cash into the next big rockabilly icon. So he's being steered down that road. And it's kind of okay for a bit. But quite soon, they really do want to move in 2 different directions, don't they?
So he basically signs with Columbia and buggers off and lies to Sam Phillips. And he said... Roy Orbison was round his house when Sam phoned when he found out he'd duped him and run off. And they're just laughing. And he's like, it's Roy Orbison there. Let me speak to him. You've got a weak voice. You can't even sing. And they're both just laughing.
Oh, you know what? That's somebody else he had a lifelong friendship with.
Oh, it's lovely. But I didn't realise he had such a tragic life, Roy Orbison.
No,
Did you know?
Yeah, I'm a huge Roy Orbison fan, so I knew all of that. And I don't know, again, because I'm drawn to sadness. It's kind of like, I've always known what happened to him and his family, but I think you can hear it in his voice. I think his voice is so beautiful, it's so fragile. And I think unlike Johnny Cash, Elvis Presley, Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee Lewis, all those very kind of sexual macho voices, Roy Orbison's in a class of his own. It's really soft falsetto. So when Sam Phillips says to him on the phone, you've got a really weak voice, I can kind of hear how he would say that. 'Cause I wouldn't say it's weak, but it sounds fragile, you know, it's just so moving.
Yes.
Yeah, I love him. I think he has a unique voice. But fucking hell, what happened to him is unspeakably tragic.
Yeah, I mean, Johnny Cash being his pretty much best friend talks a lot about him, and he says, well, I didn't know this. His first wife was killed when they were both on a motorbike in 1966, and Roy Orbison survived it. Then 2 years later, the youngest two of his 3 sons died in a house fire. He was away on tour, and they'd been playing with matches, and the grandparents were babysitting. When they realised something was wrong, they opened the door, and opening the door blew the grandparents across the house. So it's not like there was no one there to try and save them, but they just couldn't get to them. The whole house burned down. It was next door to Johnny Cash's. They were neighbours.
Next door to each other.
Johnny and June were together then, and they bought the plot. He said, you know what, I'm going to buy the plot. You won't want anyone living where your son's died. I'm going to buy the plot of land, grow an orchard, and you can always have the first crop of every season. So that's so lovely.
Yeah.
And then eventually, years later, his oldest son he saw him standing in the street staring at the orchard, and he went to talk to him, and he just said, I just find it peaceful here to think about my brothers. And he went and talked to June, and they just gave him the plot. I mean, that's a lovely friendship. And then a really nice little twist is, he said a few months before Roy Orbison died, they'd been hanging out together, and they said, hey, wouldn't it be fun if we grew ponytails and then tied it in like black ribbon, like in the old days? Because Johnny Cash mentioned, by the way, that he based his clothes on Highwayman and Benjamin Franklin.
Oh, yeah.
That's how cool he is. The book nerd. He's a book nerd too, Johnny.
Yeah, he really is.
Yeah. So, Benjamin Franklin's his hero, because he's another good man. Good man. Anyways, they agreed. Roy Orbison said, I will if you will. And then he died a few months later, so they went to the funeral, and it was an open casket, and he looked in there to pay his last respect, and he goes, I had to burst out laughing because there was this ponytail with a black ribbon round it. He'd done it. Oh, that's like brothers, isn't it? It's lovely. I didn't know that.
No, he does have some really nice connections with people, Johnny Cash.
Yeah, this book is absolutely packed full of so much love for fellow musicians, and
he talks about other people a lot.
So much, and their talent and their kindness and all sorts. It's an absolute Bible, let's say, for country music, folklore.
Yeah, definitely.
It's an amazing book for that.
I mean, he talks about the $1 Million Quartet, of course.
Yes.
That's still Sun Records, right?
Yeah, it was in Sun Records, because he talks a lot about how Carl Perkins is underrated, because it's always Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis, Johnny Cash, and Carl Perkins. But he said he was really one of the best musicians he's ever known. And
I feel that Elvis kind of usurped Carl Perkins.
He did, but I've always known that. Weirdly, I thought he died in the car crash.
Oh, really?
Carl Perkins. I didn't realise he lived, because he had a terrible car crash is what derailed his career, essentially. But I didn't realise he was still alive after it. Mm-hmm. That's my mistake.
Because he'd recorded Blue Suede Shoes first, right?
Yes. His record of Blue Suede Shoes was out. Then he had this car crash, and whilst he was in recovery, Elvis recorded his own version, and that took off.
Right.
So he just overleapt him. They were all the $1 Million Quartet.
I didn't realise that the $1 Million Quartet was literally an impromptu jam session.
Did you not? Oh, I'm an expert on this.
Oh, okay, I thought it was something that was a bit more contrived, where they said, oh, come along and we'll work together. No. It literally just happened.
Yes. He said it was Carl Perkins' session, which most people don't talk about. Then, I don't know, Johnny Cash had rolled by with his girlfriend or whatever. Jerry Lee Lewis had turned up, started playing. And then I think it might be that Sam Phillips had thought this could be good and might have phoned Elvis and said, if you're nearby, come in. I think he'd phoned one of them.
Okay.
And Sam Phillips is no fool, and he pressed record on the whole thing. And it's interesting hearing about Jerry Lee Lewis, actually. He said he was fresh out of Bible school and he was just absolutely God mad. And you think Johnny Cash is God mad, but he was like, we're all going to hell for singing this music. We're all going to hell. If I sing Whole Lot of Shaking Going On, it's going to send me to hell, and I'll take you all with me. And Carl Perkins going, no, man, it doesn't. It won't. Carl Perkins and him really clashing over this.
Amazing that he thinks singing A Whole Lot of Shaking Going On is going to send him to hell, but not marrying his 13-year-old cousin.
Yes, I know, yeah. He does mention that as well. It's like when the press really kicked off, the British press kicked off worse. He actually even says that. They went mad about it. And he was like, yeah, well, I'm not surprised. That's Jerry. That's my buddy.
Oh, my God.
Because he expected crazy things of him. But he says, people think he has an attitude about Elvis. He didn't. He just had an attitude. He's obviously a really difficult person, but immensely talented. But he knew it, he says.
Right.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
What a bunch of people. What a bunch of talents. So anyway, he gave Carl Perkins a job in his band. Johnny Cash, he played guitar for Johnny Cash for years and toured with him, and then would be the support act as well whilst he was there. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
Because I thought he was dead until I read this book. So I'm really happy that he carried on, even if he wasn't Elvis. God, it must have been annoying to watch Elvis become Elvis.
Yeah, right. Well, Elvis was particularly good.
Well, he really was, and Johnny says that. He said, every time we all toured together, I never missed his performance. I stood in the wings and watched him every single time. He was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, but you know what? That sowed the seeds to the end of Johnny Cash's marriage with Vivian, because she toured with them.
Yeah.
And then she saw how the girls reacted to Elvis.
Yeah.
And Vivian was like, Johnny, you can't do this anymore because I'm not having the girls react
can't
to you.
compete with that.
And Johnny's like, well, I'm not going to give this up.
Yeah.
And then that's what basically ended their
Is.
marriage.
He said she was really supportive until he started touring with Elvis. She was like, I don't think so.
She wanted him to come home and just get a proper job.
Yeah.
Mind you, they did have 4 daughters.
Yeah. They had 2 by the time he started touring, and it all went pear-shaped. Because he said there was so many girls, there was plenty left over, and she saw that.
Of course there is.
Yeah, of
He's
course.
a rock and roller.
Yeah.
And he's a mate of Elvis.
Yeah.
Well, he's Johnny Cash.
And he's Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
He's got everything. Yeah, so then he starts taking pills. There's a lot of this in here. He says the first time they gave him morphine when he was 11.
Yeah, but that was amazing.
Yeah. Well, it
blew his little
is.
mind.
Yeah, it's like, wow, this is great. Then the next time he had morphine for another an accident or something, he's like, oh, I remember this from when I was 11. This is brilliant. And then, of course, there's tons of pills. I mean, Elvis obviously died because of them.
Yeah. It still shocks me how young Elvis was, because
Yeah, like
he died when we were
42.
literal children.
Yeah.
He seemed so much older. Now I'm older than Elvis was when he died. You think, he was so young.
Yeah, but also if you go little boy to beautiful man to big fat sweaty Elvis, it seems like the transition, but actually when big fat sweaty Elvis was still only 42. That is crazy. Johnny Cash looks approximately the same his whole life. He never got fat, actually, because he was mostly on amphetamines, which will keep your weight down. But he does say that they were prescribed by doctors for...
Yeah, but I mean, it's still drugs, isn't it?
No, it
Do you know
absolutely
what I mean?
is drugs, but it was so available. Like, they actually prescribed them. If you were
I see,
driving a long way, they'd give you amphetamines so you could drive without sleeping. No wonder they kept all dying in car crashes.
Yeah, right.
Bloody hell. Never mind all the drinking and driving.
It is that whole prescription drug thing. It was just so free and easy before we actually realised what they can actually do. But having said that, I think it's just a racket, isn't it?
Yes.
Bloody Sackler family. They know they're making massive profits from keeping America doped up legally.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's another podcast.
It is. But his wife was onto it straight away. As soon as he started taking pills, she was going, you can't do this, you've got to stop. And that drove the wedge as well. And he said he'd come home off tour, go home. She'd have a go at him for being wired, so he'd leave and go and live in a caravan for a few days and get absolutely wrecked. So he wasn't seeing his kids.
I mean, that's serious. I understand that when you come off tour, you have to decompress. And in fact, later on in the book, when he's with June Carter and they tour together. But when they come home, they'll spend a couple of days apart in the same house to decompress.
Yes.
So I get that he needs to do that when he's going back to Vivian. But he's so racked with prescription drugs. It's such a come down going home to his family. He actually goes and lives in the desert for a week and it gets off his head.
Yeah.
I mean, that's major addiction.
Oh, yeah. It definitely is.
You know, at one point, every book we read was about paedophilia. I feel now that every book we're reading is about addiction.
Yeah.
And it's just so rife and destructive. And it's just,
I know.
It pains me to read it.
It's a bit of a Matthew Perry where he's talking about how it became a struggle to get enough pills because, you know, they was taking them by the handful.
I know, that's such a picture. When I read that sentence that he was literally taking pills by the handful, it's just like, wow.
I know.
And when he was stopped somewhere in Mexico, I think his guitar case was full of pills.
Yeah, right.
That's how many he had to take around with him to sustain his addiction.
Yeah.
It's big time.
And then he describes, I mean, it's later on, but it's this in the same chapter of drug addiction when he's describing he was on tour in Britain and the last stop was Nottingham and he's in this hotel room and he's absolutely convinced there's a fold down bed in the walls and he's trying to break the walls to get it out and And he ends up then literally breaking the wood in the walls, and then he stabbed his hand. And then in the night, he's absolutely convinced there's a poisonous spider eating his hand in Nottingham. And then when he goes to hospital, therefore, for that operation back in America, they realise his spleen's buckled or something. They have to take that out. So he's all doped up in hospital, and he's convinced the hospital needs to fly away because there's combat people coming after him. And he's going, come on, the pilot needs to take off now on the runway with this whole building. And they're like, okay, Johnny, no, now. And so then he feels the whole hospital take off, and he feels it land. Jesus Christ, that's how bad he is. He's that messed up.
Do you know, I had to read that bit twice because I was like, why is there a poisonous spider in
Oh,
Nottingham?
really?
And I was just like, hang on, what's going on? And then when I read it the second time, I was like, oh, he's tripping balls.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he like literally went crazy.
Oh, yeah. In Nottingham. It's so unlikely. Yet again, somewhere I wouldn't have pictured Johnny Cash being. It's weird. He crosses paths with June Carter a few times.
Now, the Carter family were a big, massive going concern, right?
Yeah.
So they're country...
Yeah, the Carter family, right, Johnny says he grew up on them. And you can't overestimate the importance and influence over American country, folk and pop music from this family. They popularised Southern folk music.
So they were a big deal.
A really massive big deal. And June, was on stage since she was 9, and she wrote Ring of Fire. That's pretty great, isn't it? So yeah, they really were like the first family of country. Mm-hmm. And he talks loads about them in the book, doesn't he? Absolutely reveres them. He got on so well with the dad and all of them.
The grandma.
Yeah, they talked religion, they talked music. It's like it's the history of country music is in one family, and marrying into them, it was amazing for him, I guess.
We're moving into the 1960s, and Johnny gets a new manager called Saul, right? And he has him for the next 10 years. And I think it's him who kind of gets the idea for June Carter to come and guest with Johnny on stage. It was for the Big D Jamboree in Dallas, Texas in 1961. She just came to do a guest spot with Johnny, and it went so well. Obviously, the chemistry is off the scale. They enjoyed it so much. And Johnny says to Saul, oh, see if she wants to do a few more. And she did. And that's just the beginning of a beautiful relationship.
Yeah. The music together is amazing. The friendship, the crowd love it. You're getting so much for your money, aren't you, if you're getting all of that?
Yes, and what's happening to Vivian back home with 4 girls?
She's looking after them.
She won't divorce him because she's staunch Catholic.
Yeah, that's right. He does say later on, when he's in hospital, coming down off something, that the 4 girls gather round his bedside and give it to him straight how awful it was growing up with him totally absent. I think it was the day after they'd honoured him at the White House. And the next day they're like, yeah, it's all very well they're honouring you, but this is how shit it was.
They all got country careers out of it, didn't they?
True, they're all actually legends of country now. And you know what? They're probably on tour now without their kids.
Yes. Let's read their books and see what their kids have to say about them. No, I bet.
But actually, you're right, because he does dedicate a whole chapter to his family, and they are, every last one of them, great musicians. And Roseanne Cash is his daughter, is apparently famous.
She's massively famous. What do you mean?
Well, because I don't really follow country music that much. So.
Yes, you do.
Is she?
You look like you do. Roseanne has been a big deal for about the last 30 years. And Carlene as well. Like, I'm totally aware of both of them. And I don't really listen to country. Well, I don't listen to country past 19 Kenny Rogers.
Oh, I can tell you this amazing fact, right? I don't know if you know this. I went to Nashville. I went to the Grand Ole Opry, in fact. But we also discovered there was this cowboy church on a Sunday at this place called the Troubadour, a bit out of the way. Just saw the sign and we were like, let's go there. Right? It was Joanne Yates Cash.
Right.
Cash Yates or something. It was his daughter who married Harry Yates. He mentions him in the book because he said, my son-in-law is a preacher and we talk a lot about religion. Well, he runs the cowboy church. They run it together. They talked about going to Jerusalem. They talked, and played country music, but it's like Christian country music. And then they passed a cowboy hat around for the collection. Good, isn't it?
What, you were there?
I went there.
Oh,
I went on a Sunday. I had no clue it was the Cash family church. Just turned up and it was his daughter and husband. And they said, Johnny used to come play with us and join in our services whenever he could, whenever he was in town. But he died a few years before that.
Well, he's still there.
Yeah, it's
in
kind of amazing,
spirit.
isn't it? I was like, whoa, I just popped into this cowboy church, didn't expect to get close to Johnny Cash.
Something's just occurred to me.
Yeah.
Johnny Cash, JC, Jesus Christ,
Whoa!
JC. Religion, Christianity is as important in this family as music.
Yeah, it is.
And that's for the Carter family as well as the Cash
Yes,
family.
they absolutely run together.
Yeah.
They're a singing, musical, Christian group or family.
They praise the Lord.
And he talks about Billy Graham a lot. He's like,
well, yes.
yeah, I know. I don't know it. I thought I don't know enough about Billy Graham. I always suspect people who make an entire living out of preaching. And he says, Billy Graham actually approached me. And I thought, of course he did.
Yeah.
Of course it wasn't the other way around. And he said, can I come and visit you? And he's like, I couldn't believe he would come to his house. Of course he did. Because the next thing that happens from that is Johnny Cash and June agree to play for free at all his jamborees or fundraisers. And I'm like, why are you amazed that he blessed you with his time? Look what he's got out of it.
Do you know what? To a massive non-believer like me, I totally just equate that to Scientology and Tom Cruise. It's just hijacking
cynical.
his celebrity.
Yeah, I'm very cynical about it, but I don't know enough about it. I need to investigate it so that we can know that he's probably...
What don't you know enough about? That religion
Billy
is
Graham.
the cause of all war and
No,
poverty in the world.
People are. It's
No, but
misusing-
religion is the backbone.
Misusing it is. It shouldn't be misused. If it's not misused, it could do good. But it's misused. Now, that's people. People cause the trouble. Billy Graham. Has he written an autobiography? We can't believe him. We need somebody.
Yeah,
We need his
he's
kid to
just
write one.
mega evangelist, isn't he?
Yeah.
You know what? He was possibly the biggest one in the world. I remember in the 1980s, he would come over and preach in Wembley Arena.
Right.
Yeah, he was big.
Wow.
Because he took advantage of people like Johnny and June to spread the message.
Right.
He's still whacked out on drugs.
Oh my God. Okay, so what he got into, he was wrecking every car he ever drove, and some of them are gorgeous cars, and I don't want to talk about it. It hurts. He set fire to a wildlife refuge in California.
This is
That's
pretty
the worst.
disgraceful.
That's probably the worst thing he did.
Yeah, I mean,
He just didn't care.
Yeah, he blames it on his vehicle sparking and setting fire, but actually he just was off his head.
Yes, he blamed it, but you know that he knows it's his fault, if you know what I mean. Because he did nothing about it. And he watched this fire go off and he went, I'm just going to go fishing and pretend I didn't know anything about it. And just sits there fishing whilst literally the forest's on fire right behind him.
Why would you not raise the alarm?
Because he's off his head and he doesn't care. You know, he goes to court and he thinks it's funny. And he's like, did you set this fire? No, my van did. Do you care? No, I don't care.
Oh, that's right. He said my van did, but it's knackered now, so you can't question it.
Yeah, it's dead, so you can't question it. Yeah, so he thinks it's all funny. But at time of writing, he knows it isn't. Because he said that it was a refuge for endangered California condors, and it massively reduced the population they'd been carefully building. Massively. To almost extinct.
Yeah, there was 52 and 49 of them displaced because of that fire.
Because of him.
Yeah.
But he basically says he was just totally out of order.
So he became an arsehole, didn't he?
A really bad arsehole, yeah.
He's kind of becoming so out of control that he's smashed all the footlights at the Grand Ole Opry. I mean, he's shitting on his own doorstep.
Yeah,
right
I know,
now.
because they said we're not having you back. And that's when he went off in June's car and smashed that up.
And her husband was a policeman.
Yeah, and he investigated the crash and it was June's car. And she said that was a bit awkward when I got home. Whoops.
Yeah, so things are going pretty darn crazy at this moment in time. June's putting up with it, though. But actually, June's not actually officially with him at this point because she's still married to the policeman.
No, and the thing is, he says, June could see into my soul. She's told me that I understand you. I can see your loneliness past all of this behaviour. I get you. And basically, I'm here to help you. I want to help you. And he keeps saying that God helped me. And I'm like, no, June helped you.
Yeah.
June helped you. Your mother helped you. These people helped you. He wants to think of it as God. I think June's an absolute legend and so patient. And he is a lovely man underneath all that. And she did dig it out of him. You know, she managed to get through to him. And I'm so glad he lived to be a nice person and to be sorry for all this stuff. He said, the kind of motel vandalism I pioneered is now a kind of totem of rock and roll rebellion. But it wasn't that for him. It was like deeper and darker. He said it was just violence.
So Motley Crue wreck hotel rooms because of Johnny Cash. He started it.
Yeah. I'm thinking he thinks it's just rock and roll rebellion. But if you read these books of Motley Crue people, they've got their own dark places.
Yeah, it's
They're
true.
doing it for the same reasons, actually. It's just that he gave them the idea of how to express it. Poor motels.
Yeah, right.
Poor condors.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who suffered. And poor cars, poor beautiful cars.
And actually, if you want to talk about this in a different way, poor Johnny Cash, actually, he is addicted. This is an addiction, right?
You're right. And when you start taking the odd pill and it makes you feel great and you can drive for hours, you don't realise what it's going to do to you.
I mean, it gets so bad for him that in 1967, he goes to this cave, the Nick Attack cave.
Oh, yeah.
And he was just in such a dark space that he crawled into another dark space.
An even darker space.
And laid there.
Yeah, he said... It's this network of caves. I actually Googled it because I thought this is fascinating. It's halfway between Arkansas and Nashville. So it's really in the middle of nowhere. And now it's a national park and you can see people kayaking. And he said they closed off the caves now. But there's this massive network of the history he describes, and epic history in these caves. And that's the place to go if you want to crawl into these caves. And you'd never find the way out. He crawled in miles and no way he'll get out. And then he had this epiphany that it wasn't up to him to die, it was God's will. And he'd try and find a way out. And if he could, he could, and if he couldn't, that was God's will. And he eventually found a way out. When he got out, there was June standing there with his mother, and they had food and water. And he's like, I thought you were in California. That's why I Googled it, because I wanted to see where it was. It's half the country away from California. And she said, I was, but I had a feeling you were in trouble. So she got to those caves.
It is odd, and I wonder how much truth.
Of course, he was off his head, so he might have told her he was going there. He actually might have.
I mean, he drove there.
You'd had to have drive.
Yeah,
fly to the nearest place and then drive. It's quite far from any airport.
Maybe somebody saw a car there unattended for like 24 hours and phoned the police. It's
halfway between two states.
Okay.
You know, it's amazing she was there, and it's amazing he got out. And because he then thinks it's God's will, he actually got off drugs. Even though he dabbled loads more in his life, that was the big ultimate time
he
mainly
recovery.
Got off. Yeah, started his road recovery, even though it was very bumpy.
It's like a rebirth. I mean, some would say going into a cave and coming out again, that it was a resurrection.
Oh my God, he JC'd himself.
He JC'd himself.
He did, didn't he?
Yeah, which makes me think...
Easter Day.
Yeah. It was on Easter Day in October 1967.
Shut up. No.
And when June and his mum come to meet him, they had a Cadbury's cream egg. That's how it started. I don't know. I think it's a bit... I wonder how much truth is in this story.
No, I totally believe that.
Okay.
But then I always believe everything. No, I do, because it's his major turning point was that.
And actually, if you are just so incredibly spiritual as he is, you might do something in your darkest moment, like actually crawl right into a cave to die to actually see if your faith is going to save you.
Yeah, absolutely. And because he knew the whole history of that cave, and obviously it meant a lot. He said he used to hang out there loads with friends because it was beautiful, and it is actually.
So he's started his recovery. He's more or less sober. He's performing again. Vivian's granted him a divorce finally.
Yes. And he marries June. This sort of sentence, he says, I did go back to drugs on and off. One of the times it escalated after I was almost killed by an ostrich.
Well,
I was like, what?
Yeah, I know. This
so
is
out of the
shocker.
blue, that sentence.
Yeah, it's so weird, and I'd never heard of ostrich attack on Johnny Cash.
It seemed unprovoked.
Why would it be provoked? What do you think he was
doing? He could
doing?
have locked one up and then, it finally broke free and killed its zookeeper or something. But anyway, ripped his stomach, a bit like his brother actually. He went all the way down his stomach to his belt, and he said if his belt hadn't been strong, he'd have been a goner. Yeah, that's pretty nasty.
Yeah.
That got him back on morphine.
Bloody hell. An ostrich attack, who would have thought it?
Yeah, I mean, you can't sort of prepare for that, can you?
No, because you wouldn't expect it at all. Even if you were even on an ostrich farm, well, maybe you would then. No, but I've forgotten where the ostrich came from.
I don't know, but he said he was walking down this path and it was sort of squatting, waiting for him, and he thought, I'll deal with that later. And then on his way home, it was still there. It was waiting for him. Had it in for him. Maybe that was the devil. Anyway, he talks quite a lot about various houses. A lot. Well, oh yeah, he had that classic thing. Again, a repetition of the normal thing. If you're a recording artist or a musician or a creative person, you usually don't pay much attention to money. And then obviously your accountant rips you off and spends all your money because you're not counting it. Absolutely terrible. They were making this large purchase of furniture and couldn't cover it. So they look into it. And yeah, he spent all their money. He's bought tons of property and he's bloody totally ripped them off. So they go about reacquiring all the property that was paid for with cash. And they go, hang on, let's have a look at this bloke's farm where he lives with his family, where my kids and their kids have grown up together playing because he's called Uncle Pete and they love him and trust him. They go, oh, wow, he paid for that with money as well. We'll have that. I think too right. So he takes back his accountant's farm and that's where they live to this day.
Yeah.
Lovely, happy. And then there's times where he has a TV show in the 70s and then it starts this whole thing because he can bring musicians he loves to his TV show where he just invites everybody for these jams in the house around this big circular room. He's like, that's the first time Bob Dylan played us this song and we heard Waylon Jennings sing this and Chris Christopherson sang this. And it's all these legends singing famous songs for the first time in this group. It's musical.
That's where I would like to go if I had a genie's lamp.
Would it? To that
Could
one
you
of
imagine
those
just to sit in one of their
guitar
private
pins?
hangouts, you
Oh,
know,
yeah, that's
with all those
good.
people dropping by. That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
You only really get to do that if you're famous or married to someone famous.
Yeah, I
right?
guess.
Because you don't invite the general public to just when you're hanging out and jamming.
Yeah.
Wow.
See, as soon as he's not on pills, he must be a lovely man. He's got such good friends.
Well, they could all be arseholes
They might
too.
all be us. Probably all on pills.
We haven't mentioned Folsom Prison.
No.
Because that's a really famous part of his career, isn't it?
Yeah.
To the point where people actually think he's been to prison.
Yeah.
And he hasn't.
1968, he said when he played the prison, you never got a better crowd because they loved it so much. They were so appreciative that he'd come into the prison to play. It was so vibrant. He was like, let's record this live. And everyone was against it, but he did.
Yeah, and that was possibly his most famous album, maybe?
I think it is.
So, let's think about how his career went. So he had that massive thing in the 60s of being a rock and roll star.
50s into 60s.
Sorry, yeah, 50 with
50s.
Sun Records. And then the beginning of the 60s is big. And then he's just touring, taking drugs. But then when he gets a TV show at the end of the 60s, he's massive again.
Yeah,
right?
he said it really makes him laugh that ABC Network decided that after he'd done an album to prisoners and criminals,
Yeah, right.
that he was wholesome enough now to get his own TV show.
And as we know from reading these books, you can be a rock and roll star, you can be a movie star, but nothing increases your fame than having a TV show in people's front rooms.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to him.
And also he could bring on all these guests, all his favourite musicians, but he broadened it a bit. Like he had Ray Charles and Louis Armstrong on it. Mm-hmm. Joni Mitchell, Linda Ronstadt, a real nice variety. Plus all of his old chums, I imagine.
I think Linda Ronstadt, that was the first time she ever appeared on TV, was on the Johnny Cash show. Yeah, because he really loved her and he fought to get her on.
Right.
And then after the TV show ended, so it's the beginning of the 70s, his career goes quiet again. And this is where he really researched the history of his people to then sing in new folk songs and stuff. And he went into the research. It was almost like, how like method actors really get into it to act.
Yeah.
To record this album, he was really going, and he would go to libraries that had like just one copy of something. No, hang on, was it John Wesley Harding where he actually had the original typed manuscript?
That's right. It was an autobiography of him and the old way of life. And
yeah, that's right.
Because I made a note that we must look up that book.
So did I.
Did you?
Yeah,
where the
John
hell
Wesley
we think we'll
Harding.
find it is another matter. So I told you we need to go on an American road trip to some weird bookstores all over the
Let's
random
do it.
places and find these things.
Yeah, so this is what he could do now, right? He didn't, because he had the fame and the money, he now has the time.
Yep.
And he's not so whacked out on drugs all the time. So he's really getting back into the roots of it all and the art of it all and creating.
And he's made friends with this Native American as well. And so and they're really good mates. And he's a folk singer and he gets all into that as well.
Mm-hmm.
He actually really crossed the line there. And he was the first person to really sing about that stuff. And he didn't get a lot of radio airplay because people weren't supporting that. He would support Native Americans. But he really did. He really meant it and felt it.
He put a full-page ad in Billboard because he wasn't being played on the radio with these songs. And I think he just kind of did a statement of protest to the whole music industry. Yeah, so he is actually very political and proactive.
He really is. And these are the things that make him absolutely legendary now and so respected by other musicians, because he didn't sell out ever. And actually, after that outburst of the second wave of popularity here, or the big wave in the 60s and early 70s, he really dropped off. And he says it. He says he's had a couple of bits where he's hit and then he hasn't, and he's toured a lot. He's never, ever not toured. I love that he says he could wake up on the bus any time and know within 5 miles anywhere in America where he is, because he's been on the road that much. That's a massive country. That is a really amazing thing. He's a real brain, actually, I think.
But then he said what consolidated his iconic status was when the new wave of musicians in the 1990s, and he does mention a couple of them, I've forgotten who they are, but they started citing Johnny Cash as an influence.
Yep.
And so then his work was being viewed retrospectively by the people who weren't even born.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, and that really gave him the... Oh, I tell you what, in the 1980s, I had an album called The Man in Black. And it was all people like the bands of the day, like Mark Almond, Michelle Shocked, Voice of the Beehive. And they recorded covers of Johnny Cash songs.
Oh, wow.
I still have it on vinyl.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I remember I played... That's how I discovered Johnny Cash.
Wow, and that's when he was down and out. And it was 1993. He wasn't down and out. He was playing with the Highwaymen, which was Chris Christopherson and Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings. You know, he was never doing nothing. But he wasn't really massive or cult like he is now. It was 1993. Along came Rick Rubin from American Records. He sat him down and said, I just want you and your guitar. I want you to sing. I want you to sing to me all your songs that mean stuff to you. On American Records, they were putting out Beastie Boys and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. You know,
Rick Rubin created Def Jam with that other bloke, didn't he?
So that's him.
Yeah, so I was really surprised when all of a sudden he pops up in Johnny Cash's autobiography and says, come and do what you want.
Yes, so was Johnny Cash. He was really surprised. He was like, well, I don't want you, remarketing me to young people. That's not what I want. It didn't seem to fit. So he was really suspicious for a while, and then he came over to his house and they were just jamming and he was singing him all these songs. That totally launched him into absolute cult status with a whole new generation, or 2 new generations almost. And then he suddenly got revitalised. He was suddenly playing Glastonbury to 100,000 young people. Couldn't believe it. And he said all these young people wanted to hear his 50s songs, and he was really happy to play them. He actually said, I felt like it was 1955 again.
Wow.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
It's really nice that happened to him within his lifetime, because if he died, and he could have died a million times, he'd never have had that.
It's like it just comes full circle. It's almost a shame that the recording industry does what it does, because in 1955, he was a little authentic country bloke. Yeah. And then the music industry happened, which got him into rock and roll and more commercial stuff, while he fought his whole career to do more gospel. And then he finally gets to the stage where you have to become an icon, where you can choose what you want to do. And then people go and rediscover you at the beginning so you can play it again.
And just be totally loved in your lifetime. If he'd have died, of course, he would have been an icon as well. That's the other way to do it. Of course.
It does make you wonder if Elvis would have done the Legends like Glastonbury, playing all of his earliest
Oh my
stuff.
God, imagine.
And now how amazing would that have been?
Yeah, he's lucky. He's very lucky.
Do you know what he is really? Because actually, what happened to Johnny Cash happened to Elvis, but Elvis died.
Yeah. Right.
Johnny Cash survived.
Yeah.
It's because June Carter was a better wife than Priscilla.
Stop it. Oh, well, she was older. You can't compare the two.
Well, then you shouldn't marry a 14-year-old. Ultimately, that's what killed Elvis. If he had married a nice Christian woman from a good Christian family like June Carter, Elvis would still be alive.
Shut up. At the point of writing, he literally is having the best time, and he doesn't know what's going to happen next. Not much. How long did he live? He lived
another 5 or 6 years after writing this book. Yeah, I mean, enough to do the album of covers and stuff, which is... Do you know what? I thought about listening to it again, but it's just his voice. It really is the voice of a man who knows he's dying. It's hard to explain.
No, it isn't, because I have heard it. It's really depressing.
Yeah, no, it is depressing, but there's also something really beautiful about it.
Yes. And that's why a lot of people love him, because they've got their own sufferings, and they, if somebody else feels the same, you're not alone.
What I love about Johnny Cash is that he is a survivor. We just hear so many, like we just mentioned, Elvis. True iconic artists, a lot of them tend to burn up and die so young. And actually, Johnny Cash somehow managed to stay alive.
Talk about a cat with 9 lives.
Yeah, but still produce really great work.
Oh, that's
and
true.
And the work that he wanted to do till the end of his life. Even when he's an old man when he dies.
Yeah.
And it does just make you weep what Amy Winehouse, what Kurt Cobain, what all these people would have done had they continued to be creative for another 40 years.
Yeah.
So that's an achievement.
We just have to look at the positive and go, he survived and never stopped being amazingly creative. And now we've got Johnny Cash, loads and loads of music and the history of country, and taking old America from the 30s right into the 2000s and takes it with the music all the way through.
Yeah.
It's the history of America, well, some of it, through music.
A type of music.
A type of music and a type of America.
When he recorded that last album of covers and he did Hurt, which is kind of like the known track, they recorded the video of it at the beginning of 2003, and June is in it. And they're both, they both are old. They just look so lovely, and it's so heartbreaking. Yeah. 6 weeks later, she died.
Yeah.
By the end of the year, he'd gone as well.
Yeah.
I think without her, he wasn't interested in going on any longer.
Yeah, and he wouldn't have made it without her either. At all.
Yeah, there we go. All right.
Men in Black. The Man in Black. What's the film called?
Galaxy Defenders.
Yeah. All of this is in Walk the Line. Have you ever seen it?
No, I've never seen it.
I have seen it.
I'm a bit funny with biopics. So as a Johnny Cash fan, would you recommend that film?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know if I am a Johnny Cash fan. I mean, to be a fan, I'd have to have his records and listen to them and blah, 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 and I don't. But I love him and I love this book. And if I hear Johnny Cash, I'm really happy.
I didn't know that Ring of Fire was the first country song to have brass in it. And that came to him in a dream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good, isn't it? By the way, if you go to the Grand Ole Opry, which I have done and done a tour of it and everything, and seen a band there, all that, I love all that. There's quite a lot of Johnny Cash there. There's whole glass cases with his outfits in and stuff, and you really get the size of the man, literally, because he's a big man. He's not big, he's tall and imposing, and his suits are dark, and you feel like it's as close as you can to meet him in the Grand Ole Opry. They're around the back. If you just went to see a gig, you'd see him. And I didn't realise his TV show was recorded live at Grand Ole Opry because it's the home of country music. That's really his place. That makes more sense now. And June Carter's much smaller and her costumes are there. It's a real family, isn't it? A real sense of family.
Yeah, I do get that with country more than any other genre of music, actually.
Yeah, they look out for each other.
That's exactly what I was about to say. It's not like rock and roll or metal or rap where they're all shooting each other. Country really look after their own.
They do.
It's to do with Jesus, I think.
It might be.
Church and community.
Yeah, maybe a lot of them come from poverty and come up in the fields, and I don't know, well, they used to anyway.
Yeah. What's your favourite Johnny Cash song?
What's the one? I shot a man in Reno just
Folsom Prison Blues.
Him die. I love that. By the way, I met a man from Reno.
Did you shoot him?
I said, I sang that song to him, and I said, I'm so sorry, you must be sick of that. And he said, I don't know that song.
What?
I said, how can you come from Reno and not know that song? And he just stared at me. He said, I don't know it. I don't know what you're talking about. Huh?
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Thrift Shop Biography. We love making this podcast and we're absolutely thrilled that so many of you are already listening. You could really help us out by leaving us a review somewhere, wherever you listen to this podcast. And if you could share us, tell your friends about us, or drop some links on social media. We have a Facebook page called Thrift Shop Biography, so make sure you come over there to hear about the episodes first and what else we're up to. Okay, see you next week. And if you're new here, there are loads more episodes now to go and listen in the back catalogue, so make sure you go and enjoy them. Okay, thank you very much.